Good morning, everyone. This is Ruth Buchanan. Welcome to today's edition of FloridaMakes webinar series, a very important, timely topic as we continue our learning on tariffs. Many of you have been joining us on our tariff, almost it's its own series on tariffs, right? We talked about the basics of tariffs. And then we followed that up with tariff mitigation strategies with our very competent speaker. We borrowed her from her very busy time, Deborah Stern. Everybody should have received a recording of that one and PowerPoints as well. So today is almost like a part 2 on tariffs. We are very pleased to be joined today by a renowned speaker on the subject matter expert. A couple of housekeeping. The chat and the Q&A are both open, and we welcome your comments and questions. The team will monitor your questions as they come in. We like to allow our presenter the time to share their content first, so pay attention. And if there's a question that wasn't addressed or not fully addressed, we will bring that back during the Q&A at the end of Harry's presentation. Yes, you will get the recording directly from Zoom about an hour after this webinar is done. And those are the two housekeeping I have in mind. So reshoring is surging, everybody. So learn how your company can benefit from this tool. Next slide, please. FloridaMakes, we are your Florida Manufacturing Extension Partnership affiliate here in the state of Florida. Our mission is to improve the productivity and technological performance of Florida's manufacturing sector. And the vision is to be the recognized leader for strengthening and advancing Florida's manufacturing economy. I'll take a moment to say that this was our mission vision for the past 10 years. It is changing, so get excited. We have some new statements as we move into our second 10 years. And how do we help our manufacturers? It's right here. We help with your technology acceleration and innovation, cybersecurity and intellectual property. This is a big one. Pay attention. We will be doing a series of CMMC webinars as well and outreach around the state. And number 3 is the supply chain optimization. That's very important, again, in the light of today's tariff discussion. Our bread and butter, our business advisors are here to help you do a performance assessment of your operations to ensure that you have continuous improvement baked into your SOPs. And then workforce training is important, right? You need your people to ensure that you're able to produce whatever you're producing in a timely, efficient, productive manner. And then lastly, business growth and financial services. We had a series on tax credits as well. So next slide, please. Today's key takeaways, ladies and gentlemen, reshoring and FDI has brought 1 million jobs to the US since 2010. Harry will talk more about that. Our Florida original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and contract manufacturers can benefit from the trend. And Harry will share the results of the reshoring survey. And then lastly, a super important new concept for many of us. Harry invented this, created this, a total cost of ownership for buying and selling smarter. So next slide, please. I think this is Harry's picture. So without further ado, it is our pleasure on behalf of FloridaMakes and the champions and everybody behind me. We are so excited to have Harry Moser join us, the founder and president of Reshoring Initiative. He's got an amazing credential bio. He will share more as I hand over the presentation to him. Harry, go ahead and start sharing your screen.
I think
there he is.
Is it shared? Is the screen shared or not shared?
Not quite yet, but go ahead and show your T-shirt while you're, well, sorry, I don't want to confuse you.
Okay, so I'm wearing my Manufacturing is Cool T-shirt, which is, of course, made in the United States out of U.S. cotton. Okay, and and I believe in that. I've been in manufacturing for 55 years, and it's a wonderful industry, a wonderful career, and helping our youth understand that and come to join all of you is essential for the future of the country. So I hope you share my belief in that manufacturing is cool. Okay. So I'm going to talk about, let me give you background. So Ruth asked me to do a little of that, and thank you, Ruth, for having me here. So I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine. Their main plant in the world was there, and it was 3 million square feet, 5,000 workers. This is 120 years ago. It was the biggest factory of any kind in the world. And I drove past 10 years ago, and everything was gone. Everything was being imported. All the products were being imported from low-wage countries. And I saw the same happen throughout my career, selling machine tools, foundry equipment, industry after industry, company after company wiped out, sometimes before I got to sell them anything. So I've seen the decline of US manufacturing, and the Reshoring Initiative is my effort to reverse that decline. A little more background, went to MIT, got 2 engineering degrees, worked up through a series of companies, eventually EDM company, Charmy, now known as GF Machining Solutions. I was the president of that for North America for 25 years. Wonderful job, wonderful products. I loved it. Had many Florida customers, so I was down here a couple of times a year and had great relationships, great customers, wonderful to work with. I founded the Reshoring Initiative in 2010. Had some nice events, met with President Obama. He was quite interested. I'm in the Industry Week and AME Halls of Fame. And if any of you you want to learn more, you can follow me on LinkedIn, and you'll find all kinds of links to national media coverage. This afternoon, I have a NPR interview, for example. So the world is interested, and obviously, especially the United States is interested in what we're doing. So I'm going to talk about reshoring and a tariff mitigation strategy. So the idea is that if you make it here, then there are no tariffs, because there's no tariffs on the things that move from Florida to Mississippi or Texas or what have you. So making it here, making it in the United States, is a way to mitigate and reduce all of this, all of these problems. Let's see if we can get the slides now to come down. Okay, right now the slides are, there we go. So my purpose is to show the strength and driving forces of reshoring, because you're only likely to do it if you believe it's feasible. And one way to know it's feasible is to see that it's happening, to help companies decide what to produce where, produce or source where, how to compete with imports, to encourage encourage your customers to produce and source more here instead of there. So in Florida instead of India or China or somewhere else. And all of this by recognizing all the costs and risks. That's the TCO estimator to which Ruth referred. Okay, I just told you about this, what it's going to bring to you, that having you understand that it's real, that it's happening, that in some cases, not all cases, but some cases you can do it, help you compete with imports, for example, and significantly by using TCO, to which Ruth referred earlier. And the last item there, turn uncertainty into opportunity. So there's been thousands of articles and news reports about the uncertainty of the tariffs. And certainly there is uncertainty, but in some ways that's an opportunity, because for your company and for your customers, knowing that there's that uncertainty, there's uncertainty of geopolitical risk, there's all kinds of uncertainties that are associated with offshoring. And by reshoring, by your company reshoring or convincing your customers to reshore, that uncertainty is eliminated. So you can mitigate that the all kinds of risks by bringing the work back to the United States. Not everything, but our tools will help you decide what to bring back next. So just to show the importance of this, mostly I'm going to focus on why it's important for you and your company, but from a national impact. And obviously the nation's important. MEP is a national effort. The uh, our mission is to remove the goods trade deficit, which last year was 1.2 trillion with a T, and eliminating that, getting back to balanced trade. So on average, the same as all other countries, would increase manufacturing jobs by about 5 million, so about 40%. Income equality would be improved, so a lot of the discussion about the unfairness of the current system would go away. The budget deficits, $2 trillion year budget deficits would come down because of the taxes paid by the manufacturing workers and by their companies. Emissions would be lower. When you reshore, often the emissions for that product are reduced by 25, even 50%. Innovation would be improved. A lot of people say, well, forget that manufacturing stuff. We should become an innovation economy. Well, it turns out that innovation works best. First, most innovation comes out of manufacturing, and manufacturing innovation works best when engineering and manufacturing are near each other and can speak to each other in the same language. The workforce would be strengthened because they believe that manufacturing is coming back. And maybe most important, defense industry capability would be sufficient. So we've reached a point where our defense industry is not capable of supporting any ongoing military operations by the country, and that's obviously not acceptable. Next. So to give you a little history on this, I mentioned Singer, and the blue line shows the decline in manufacturing employment as a percentage of total employment, so down from 27% to about 8 or 9%. And the red line is the trade balance, again, currently about $1.2 trillion. And a lot of people say this is inevitable. Next. So economists will often say, well, we're a high wage country, advanced country, let those poor people do those dirty jobs in manufacturing. But this chart says that's not true. The lightest colors have the least lowest manufacturing as a percentage of total employment. The darkest colors have the highest. And you can see that Europe, which has wages, living standards very similar to ours, has significantly higher manufacturing as a percentage of employment than we do. Japan, South Korea, and so many of the countries have that. And so it's not inevitable that the US should have to settle for a low amount of manufacturing. It's a choice that the US has made. Next. And one of the things that has driven that choice has been the fact that US manufacturing is expensive relative to almost every other country. So this chart is from users of the TCO estimator, and it shows the horizontal axis is the Chinese price as a percentage of the US price. So we had 190 cases where the users had put in the data. We knew what the Chinese price, what the US price was, and you can see the peak of the distribution is somewhere around 65, 70%. So US on average is 100, China on average is 65 or so, huge gap between the two. So companies inevitably are drawn to that lower price. And if it isn't China, then it's India or Vietnam or Indonesia or somewhere else. And even in comparison to the high income countries like Germany, Switzerland, Holland, and so on, our price is still typically 10, 20% too high. Next. And fortunately, things are starting to get back into balance. President Obama helped, President Biden helped, President Trump is helping. We've helped. And we talk about reshoring or onshoring. They mean essentially the same thing. A US company bringing back the manufacture of products that will be sold or assembled here. We talk about FDI, so foreign direct investment, a similar logic, but a foreign headquartered company. So reshoring could be General Motors and FDI could be Toyota, for example. We talk about localization, which is producing near the consumer, and nearshoring, which is producing in a near country, a neighboring country. So from the US perspective, that would be Mexico or Canada. And my first choice is to get the work to the US, always my first choice, but there's some work that's so labor intensive you can't get it there. And Mexico has wages that are substantially lower than China's. So there's logic of moving work out of China, out of places like that into Mexico and building Mexico up, get their manufacturing to rise so fast that their wages come up to, instead of $3 an hour, come up to 10 or $12 an hour. And then US companies will stop offshoring to Mexico. Next. The trend has been overall very favorable. When I started this in 2010, in that year, 11,000 jobs were announced. And in 2024, 245,000, I think, were announced. And looks like 2025 will come out about the same level. So it's been overall very much more than anybody expected, including myself. We had a peak under Trump with tax and regulatory cuts, and then a fall off with the trade war, and then it picked up with COVID, and peaked with the CHIPS and IRA acts under President Biden. So everybody's played a role in this. Next. A lot of the improvement during COVID was due to the country finding out our dependencies. So, for example, remember the TV show, the news shows at night, when you could see the doctor and the nurse saying, I'm wearing the same mask I've worn for 5 days, and I'm afraid I'm going to die, kind of thing. A valid complaint on their part, because the US didn't make anywhere near enough masks, because we were so dependent on China, especially to produce them for us, and they needed them for their own use. Same, we also found out pharmaceuticals, that 70, 80, 90% of what we consume is sourced offshore. The chips, the rare earth minerals, even the Defense Department puts out a report every year or two describing the products, the components, the materials that they cannot get here, that they're dependent on someone else, especially an adversary. And obviously that's not a good condition. Next. And things have gotten worse with disruption. So we had the Thai floods, we had the Chinese COVID, our own LA dock strike, which held things up, the Suez Canal blockage, the Russian, Ukraine, Israeli, Hamas. Companies are starting to see that we can have 6 weeks or even months of delays in product if you're depending on something from far away. And next, and hanging over all of that is the concern about something kinetic happening with China, especially over Taiwan. So this is a quote from S&P Global, a very credible organization, says that a company would be unrealistic if it thought that they'd be able to continue to get low-cost product from China on a dependable basis despite geopolitical events, and that companies should think about reshoring, or finding a new source, and I'd say reshoring, as a form of insurance, just like they buy, or you buy, fire insurance and flood insurance here in Florida. It's necessary. It's logical to insure against geopolitical risk, against decoupling with another country, and the best way to do that is to reshore. Next. So here's, I think, a very interesting visual. This comes from a company called Reshoring, and they say things have gone from the condition on the left, that's the before, to the condition on the right, that's the after. So before, it was save pennies on the components, and now it's make sure you have the components so you can produce your end product, sell it, get revenue, get margin, keep customers. And so the shift has gone to eliminating that uncertainty associated with offshoring. Next. So to support companies in making that decision, we came out with a geopolitical risk map. And this is on our website. And behind it, there's a table so you can see the actual numbers. But the idea is that the probability or the risk of decoupling of a US company being cut off from another country, expressed as a percentage per year, is varies from country to country. China obviously being one of the highest probabilities. And the idea is for a company to look at all the product it's getting from China, like Apple's doing now. Obviously, they've got a real problem because so much comes out of China. So you can look at everything they're getting out of China and Taiwan specifically, but other countries also, but specifically China and Taiwan. And say, if those were cut off for 6 months, for a year, for some extremely long period of time, how long would it take me to get another supplier to replace that? And how much revenue would I lose? How much margin would I lose? How many customers would I lose? And therefore, how much more should I be willing to spend now on a slightly higher price, a slightly higher total cost, perhaps, to source those products here now. So if this happens, in the case that this happens, then I'll have suppliers here to go to and say, hey, I brought you the business when things were good. Now I'm desperate. I need you to make some more things for me so I can stay in business and keep buying from you. Next. So I mentioned before emissions, and so significant reduction in emissions for components, what's called scope 3, that's the supply chain, especially if the product is electrically intense. Next. And this is due to the fact that the US electricity has a very small coal content in the fuel range. So you can see we're the fourth, I think, from the bottom, whereas China and South Africa are up there at the top. So with China, there's more CO2 per kilowatt hour. So for any product that has a lot of kilowatt hours, think aluminum, steel, things like that, there's a lot more CO2 per pound of the product, and then you got to ship it here. So we've done analyses of 9 different products and show typically a 25% reduction when you shift from producing specifically in China to here. But our methodology will work with any country. Next. Despite all this, despite the nice arguments that say you ought to bring it back, I run into companies that say, yeah, Harry, I believe you. I worry about all those things at night, but the US is still too expensive. And our response is, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, not if the companies use total cost of ownership. And total cost of ownership starts with the FOB or ex-works price, adds in duty and freight to get landed cost, and then adds in carrying cost of inventory, travel costs, intellectual property risk of stocking out because you have just generally long deliveries, risk of geopolitical risk that could stock you out for a year. So a whole range of considerations like that. And when you put all those in, there's the friction cost, the extra cost of importing from many of those countries adds 25% to the real cost of the product, but most companies don't recognize that. Next. So here's a chart that shows sort of the results of that. So the horizontal axis is still China as a percentage of US. The blue line is the same data I showed you before. So China price as a percentage of US. The red line is China total cost of ownership as a percentage of US. You see it's shifted to the right. And the yellow line is TCO, but with a 15% tariff, such as the kind of tariffs President Trump is implementing now. The key thing is to look to the lower left-hand corner, and the US wins 8% of the time on price, 32% on total cost, and 46% of the time if there's a 15% tariff. So companies that are only looking at price and not considering TCO and the tariff are leaving money on the table. There's significant portions that can be brought back. And obviously the intent is not to bring back the things where the China price is 25% of the US, because you're going to bleed to death and go bankrupt, but to bring back the ones where it's 80, 85, 90%, to start with those and bring back 10, 20%, get that under your belt, and then to become more productive, invest more, automate more, and then go after even further to the left. Next. As a proof of this is a chart that KPMG, big accounting, auditing, and so on firm, consulting firm, they had a project for a client, and they helped the client offshore and expected 50 million in savings due to lower labor costs. But when they got done, they found that the freight costs rose by 20 million. The service level penalties, so penalties for late delivery to their customer, were 12 million. and they had additional costs of inventory carrying like 27 million. So finally, they thought they were going to save 50, and they did on the labor, but they had 59 million of other costs. So net, it was 9 million more expensive. Just very consistent with what our TCO would say. Next. So here's a case study or an example of that put in place. There's a EMS company. They populate circuit boards like you see here. They're located in Woodridge, Illinois. Mori Corp is the name of the company. And two interesting events. One, they had a aluminum die cast housing that that they had I think a leak with it, some quality issue. Customer forced them to find a domestic die casting supplier, and when they did that, they fixed the quality problem. Yeah, but they also found their inventory was reduced by 94%. Why? Because instead of having a container coming in once a month or once a quarter and of uncertain quality, they were having known product coming in maybe once a week or even every day for delivery to the factory, therefore minimal inventory. Second interesting occurrence, they came to me about 6 years ago and they said, Harry, we need your help. What's the problem? We're going to lose a big order to a Chinese customer, Chinese competitor that has undercut our price. And so I helped them do the TCO calculation. They showed the customer that even though Maury's price was higher, the total cost to the customer was lower. And I have a letter from them saying that was the key to winning a $60 million order. I'd be delighted to help any of you win a $100,000 order or $1 million order. Call me and let me help you. Next. Here's a case of reshoring. This is Sumitomo. I think it's Sumitomo Heavy Industries, and they make power transmissions, mechanical sort of power transmission systems like this. Next. You can see a little more of the detail, a lot of castings, a lot of machining going on, and they brought back next. Now they brought back the castings, sourced them in the U.S., and they bought millions of dollars worth of machine tools. They're machining it, making the product here that previously they had been making outside of the United States. So that company, Sumitomo Drive Technologies, won the National Metalworking Reshoring Award in 2024, which was awarded at IMTS, the big machine tool show in Chicago. And the 2025 award will be September 11th, 2025 at FabTech, so the big metal fabricating show. And it's still time. I'm still looking for applicants. So any of you who have reshored something metallic in the last 10 years, something like that, go to our website, email me. Love to have some more applicants. Next. So here's under President Trump, there's been a lot of uncertainty that's come out, and he's trying to get companies to bring massive amounts of manufacturing back, and there's been a large number, maybe 20, 25 big companies that have announced reshoring. So I'm going to show you 3 slides listing a whole bunch of companies. But the sort of the theme through all of them is that the company will proceed when it knows what the tariff structure is going to be, and that it will last long enough for them to build the factory and make a profit on building the factory. Because the thing they cannot afford to do is invest $1 billion to build the factory, and then the tariffs end, and now U.S. manufacturing is no longer competitive. So you see here, next, a list of these companies, just so you can see who's doing this. So big companies, typically multi-billion dollar projects. You're going to need a lot of components, a lot of tooling, a lot of things you might be able to help with. Next. And there's more. I made this up a month ago, and there's probably 5 or 10 more I could have added. Next. So I'm going to show you some slides, and this is one of the first reveals of this. We did a survey, a national reshoring survey, and we did it with Kathy Nunnally, who's at Regions Recruiting, an excellent recruiting firm. We've got responses from 500 companies. We were delighted with that. Next. Okay, 220 of them were OEMs, so big companies, all industries. Next. And for one of the things we asked, what were your top reasons to reshore to the US? And the number one item was the benefit of having manufacturing near engineering. Remember, I talked about innovation. Innovation happens best when you've got in manufacturing and when you have manufacturing near engineering. Freight and duty, geopolitical risk, like we've just been talking about, generally being in proximity. Next. On what basis are you comparing offshore versus domestic products? Only 30% of them said they're using total cost, and I'm pretty sure they're not using as robust a system as we offer. But 18 are still just looking at FOB price, 35% landed cost. So there's significant opportunity to convince these OEMs, for OEMs to convince themselves, to look at total cost, or for you to convince them so they'll consider your offering and see that it's preferable to the foreign offering. Next. This is, I think, very, very timely. So we asked them, how much of the product you now are importing would you reshore if? So starting at the bottom, the US dollar was 15% lower, 21%, much less regulations, 18, corporate tax rates cut, 19%, additional tariffs, 24%. And the one thing that has not been in Trump's policy proposals is a US workforce with higher skills and an abundant supply. And so it came out substantially higher than any of the others, and would be in many ways the least expensive of at least several of those proposals. So we believe that having a top US workforce, having a program more like what the Germans do with their apprenticeship system, the Germans, the Swiss, the Austrians, is absolutely essential, because if you don't, you need a much greater quantity of workers if you're going to increase manufacturing by 30 or 40%, and you need a better quality of workers, smarter people, better trained, solid training combination, community college and apprentice, to get the productivity and the quality output that we need to take the manufacturing back. Next. We asked them about the possibility of a Chinese invasion, and 56% said they were concerned, but only 35% said that identified products to reshore now as insurance. So significant opportunity to convince some of these OEMs to be more, have a greater vision of the future, and especially if you can show them that they can bring it back now and not impact their P&L, and preferably strengthen their balance sheet. I would think you could convince some of them to do it. Next. This for those who are supply chain companies, contract manufacturers, is selling to other bigger companies. We asked, how much more would you pay for components with 1 week lead time versus 6 week lead time? So 6 weeks is fairly typical from inland China to, say, Chicago or Florida or somewhere like that. And you can see that a substantial portion of them, 30, 40, 50%, said they'd pay 10, 15, 20% more for the product because of all those advantages I described before: inventory control, it's manufacturing near engineering, et cetera, et cetera. So keep this in mind and get your delivery times down to the lowest, the shortest you possibly can, so you can open up more advantage relative to those offshore suppliers. Next. Now, I'm going to take you through some responses from the contract manufacturers. And I'm assuming that there's more of those in the audience than there are OEMs. Next. So what is your typical revenue? So you can see it seems to be in the 10 to 25 million range, is sort of the middle of the distribution. So typical for, I'd say, for contract manufacturers. Next. During the last 10 years, have you reshored anything? 29% said they had, another 30-40% said they were working on it. Some said they have not. And then some weren't sure whether the previous supplier was offshore or not, so they couldn't judge it. Next. on what basis are your customers comparing offshore versus domestic? And the contract manufacturers were not as confident as the OEMs were that the OEMs were using total cost. They thought more of them were using FOB and other more simplistic measures, which tend to favor the import. Next. How often do they use TCO as a sales tool? And 31% said always, but that means 69% didn't always. And if you're competing with imports, you obviously should bring that up. And if the buyer doesn't know what that is or doesn't want to hear about it, he may tell you no. But if 5 or 10 of you call on that buyer in a month and all of you bring it up, then eventually they might soften and be willing to look at the objective way to make the decision. Next. On average, about 5% of their work has been reshored, so distribution across different percentages. Next. On the average, they felt that if they could bring back all the work they'd lost to import since the year 2000, they'd increase their output by 26%. So pretty close to the 40% that I'd like all of you to increase your output. Next. On average, in about 33% of the quotes that they were making, they were competing against imports. So 1 out of 3 quotes, there was at least one import in there. Next. And the principal reason they lost to the imports was price, overwhelmingly. Next. We all knew that. And they asked how on the average, they felt that the imported product price was about 25% lower than their price. So fairly similar to the numbers I've given you for Europe, combination of Europe and China. Next. If they were more, we asked them that same question we asked before to the OEMs, what would these various policy changes do for you? And they put the contract manufacturers put more emphasis on regulations than did the OEMs. I think that's perhaps because their volumes are smaller, so it's harder to justify the pollution control and other things that involved. Their margins are thinner, et cetera, et cetera. And I was surprised they put less emphasis on the workforce. And I would have thought they'd have more problems because their wages are typically lower than the OEMs. Next. Significant numbers of them felt that regulations were a problem for them in being competitive. Next. And just for variety, I asked them what percentage of your revenue comes from exports, and I was expected 8% to Mexico, 4% to Canada. That makes sense, but 11% were being exported to the rest of the world, and that was higher than I would have expected. Next. Concerning their cases of reshoring, about 71% of the cases, the customer had already been assembling the end product in the US and switched components to sourcing from offshore to the domestic supplier, and 29% was associated with new assembly that the OEM was reshoring to the US. So what I expect is that the blue will continue. There'll still be more component sourcing here for the existing assemblies, but there'll be more of the red in the future as the big companies bring back more assemblies. They're going to need components, and there's not much sense bringing the assembly here if you don't bring more of the component sourcing here. So I think those of you who are contract manufacturers can benefit as both of the trends continue. Next. This is just to stay timely with some of the things that the president has proposed and asked companies if all illegal immigrants were deported, what would happen? Most people said nothing. It wouldn't be a problem. 62% neutral, but there were 24% of them that said some negative impact. Now, I did not make clear in the question will the impact be negative because you're going to lose workers or negative because you're going to lose customers? And it's possible in some cases those were customers that they were talking about. Next. Concerning Chinese risk, China-Taiwan risk, they saw the contract manufacturers saw the OEMs as being less involved and less proactive than the OEMs saw themselves being. Next. So that's the end of the slides, and you're going to get a copy of this. You can see them. I hope you find them useful. I've mentioned before that skilled workforce, I believe, is the #1 objective. Without that, everything else isn't going to work. And so we've been doing an article series for AMT, which puts on IMTS, the big machine tool show. And so we're now up to 3 or 4 articles, and the articles show a current industry leader who started as apprenticeship, right out of high school apprenticeship, not college, but apprenticeship, so as to be able to show today's students that you can go right out from high school into an apprenticeship and still have a substantially good job. So the eligibility requirement is that they have to now be making as much or more than the average PhD. And so if you know of any candidates, if you're a candidate, what have you, if you fit those criteria, let me know. I'd be happy to include you in our article series. Next. So as an example of this, here's Crispin from Index, a machine tool supplier in the US, and a picture of him in the early years when he was an apprentice and now at his prime, so to speak. And so we've had very good response to the article. Next. So some things to talk about with OEMs. Again, assuming you're contract manufacturers, if all products from China, Taiwan, nearby countries stop, how severe would the impact be? What would it do to your business? Next. Are you planning on reshoring any of those now as insurance? Next. If not, why not? What can I do to help you? How can I help you be protected from this risk? Next. Are you using total cost of ownership in making your decisions? If not, we can help you find access to that tool to make better decisions. Next. I think this is very interesting. This analysis is from Michael Pettis. He's a very well-known international, more or less economist. And he says, in the discussion about industrial policy, which traditionally America has opposed, economists, politicians, no industrial policy, let the market decide, blah, blah, blah. And what Michael says is, if we do not have an industrial policy, that we're living under the industrial policy of the other countries. So China has obviously had a very strong and very successful industrial policy. Many of the countries manipulate their currency. They have strong apprentice programs. They do various things to make themselves competitive. And if we do nothing, if we take no actions to be competitive, then we're living under their policy. So that, I think that's a mistake. We should live under our policy, preferably a good one. Next. Yeah. Another comment, this is from Hal Brands. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins. And he said that we should be learning from what's happening out there now, that we see Ukraine and we see getting ready over in Taiwan. And it's clear that we do not have a sufficient defense industry base. There was some simulations that were done by congressmen and simulation of a war over Taiwan, and we run out of everything in about 2 or 3 weeks, and the Chinese still have massive stockpiles, we lose. And so he's saying we need a much stronger defense industrial base, but we also need to expand America's overall production capacity. You go back to World War II, and in that war, my father was at that Singer sewing machine factory, and for a while they didn't make sewing machines, they made bomb sites for the military to use in the war over Europe, over Japan, what have you. And we don't have enough of that overall production capacity to be able to either shift workers from those factories to the defense plants or to introduce defense products at the commercial product plants. But we just don't have the people, we don't have the physical machines, etc. So to be ready for these things to happen, the best way is to be ready, is to be strong. And then if we're strong, much less likely to have anything go wrong. Next. So a couple of recommendations based, I think, consistent with the things that I've been describing you. Develop skilled workforce. If you don't do that, you're going to lose. Florida's going to lose. The country's going to lose. And sell using total cost, using ESG, emphasizing geopolitical risk. Have to be careful about it, but if you know the customer, you can do it. Show the customer how you can help them get back to just in time, which they maybe went away from during the COVID crisis, but with you being close and delivering, you can make it happen again. Tariff mitigation, the subject of our presentation, work closely with the customer's engineering. If they're getting a lot of benefit from working with you in the design and the details of the product, they're going to be much more likely to stay with you than to go offshore. Promote reshoring on your website. If you're a contract manufacturer, I think you should have a page or a section devoted to the benefits of reshoring and why the customer should think about stopping importing and instead buy things from you. Improve delivery. I showed you how the value in having quick delivery. If you can get yours down substantially, you'll be better off. Next. So we're a nonprofit. We've got 32 sponsors, broad range of organizations, significantly manufacturing trade associations, but also companies. You know, AMT, you know, SME, Modern Gardner, Modern Machine Shop, etc. So we've been honored to have all these groups support us in what we do. Next. And this slide shows the contact information, how to reach me, how to find some of the things I've talked about. So when you have this, you can call me, you can email me. And again, I'd love to hear your reshoring successes. Love to have you apply for the award. Love to help you have some more reshoring successes. So Ruth, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harry. That was quite the material that you shared with us today. I can tell you our Q&A and our chat is lit. So you certainly fomented some good thinking. So we have about 9 minutes. What I'd like to do is I'm going to address the workforce related questions to the extent that I can at this point. Patricia, go ahead and show the slide. Yes. So Harry, they were busy asking about workforce. I'm going to have you address workforce as a national policy after I go through a couple of slides that I quickly put together. So thank you, everyone. Your questions, concerns, and inquiry on how to grow, how to have a very quick response in workforce development, those are very valid. What I can do is address them. I will address them quickly through a few slides. I was on the phone with my workforce development person, asked him to come. He cannot come. He has a meeting. So he said, have the questions put together, and then we will put together a supplemental document for you, okay? But I wanted to show this to you. This slide that I'm showing right now is from our website. This is from our workforce development program. Look at those apprenticeships that we have been doing for many years. And a lot of these are grant funded. So this is a moment for us to tell you, we do have these programs available for Florida manufacturers. And those of you not in Florida, your state MEPs will have a similar thing. So production, you can see the titles. I don't have to go through them. This is addressing your need to have, these are mostly entry-level manufacturing jobs, but there are others because we firmly believe the principle of learn to earn, or earn to learn. Marcelo will say that better, but we do believe in helping you grow, not just attract new employees, but also grow the ones that you have. So the retention and the growth. Next slide, please. The other resource that we have for you is this ours or is this the state? This is still ours. So we do have a wonderful veteran focus program also to help absorb our veterans that are coming into the workforce. It's a wonderful, compassionate, responsive program. We had a webinar on this one a couple months in late January. We can share with you the video on that as well. Next slide is another one. This is our career source, folks. Please know that we have a statewide workforce development board that is funded really by the SBA. They have a lot of complementary programs as well. If you're not engaged, please go to their website. The way it works is I think there's 24 regions, so find your region and then contact your people at your region. I have dealt with them, worked with them, helped my manufacturers when I was in economic development at the county and city level. It works. You just have to be patient because they have their, grant funding requirements, but make sure you use those resources. And then I think I have one more slide, Patricia. Yeah, so these are the two webinars that we had already concluded on the topic. January 24th, that's the veteran focus apprenticeship. And then just last week, we talked about building a future ready workforce. We will make those videos available to all of you that have registered for this, for today's webinar. But let's take it big picture, Harry. Your comments and presentation also touched upon workforce development. Any big picture comments on that?
Yeah, I met in the Secretary of Labor's conference room about 10 years ago, and they asked me to tell them how to get the workforce ready for reshoring. And I stood up and said, well, the Department of Labor has got to stop being part of the problem and become part of the solution. And they said, okay, what do you have? And I pulled up one of their charts that shows it's got horizontal bars in it, and it shows income going up with number of degrees and $1 million more lifetime income than a high school graduate if you have a bachelor's degree. And I said, why don't you show in here the average income of people who passed an apprenticeship? So the parent, the student, the guidance counselor can say, every time they look at that chart, we say, wow, apprenticeships, let's see, no tuition. You start making money when you're 18. Your company will probably send you on to get a bachelor's degree in engineering. That's a really good alternative. And so you make it a lot easier to get people to come on for that. So if you could get Florida to promote that idea, I think it'd be great. We encourage, we'd love to have the federal government give out fewer college loans and offer apprentice loans. Because one of the reasons more companies don't have apprentices is at the end of the 4 years they paid them. The kid was in school some of the time, getting paid while he was in school. You have a master working with him. At the end of the 4 years, maybe the company lost money on the kid, and then the kid goes to work for a big company for $5 more an hour, and the company says, "Well, that was stupid. I'm never going to do that again." And whereas if the worker was borrowing $5 an hour throughout the apprenticeship, so the company didn't have to pay them as much. And then if they stayed on with the company for 5 years or after every year the company pays off 20%, I think that'd be wonderful. I've encouraged the SBA to make loans to companies, poor credit companies, a quarter million dollar guarantee for automation for each apprentice that they hire. So everybody be taking a risk on everybody else. So and that article, I show kids the articles that I showed you, and I think you might convince some of them to go ahead.
So I think we're going to have quite a nice comprehensive follow-up information packet for everyone. I have more thoughts in my head, but I want to address the other questions. So on the topic of workforce, if you do not know how to contact your local career source board, just respond to my email when I send it to you, and I'll connect you with our business advisors who will make sure that you get that service. Okay, so let's leave it at that. Follow-up information later. Harry, I want to go to some super awesome big picture regulatory questions from everyone. I'm going to package them together in the interest of time. So one is our regulatory environment making the U.S. less competitive? That's really the essence of a lot of the questions. And number two, how about the compare and contrast between service and manufacturing industry? Yes, we have a deficit on one end, but maybe a surplus on the service industry. Your general comments on that one. We're not going to solve our industrial policy today, but just general comments on that one. And Yeah, so go ahead and address those, please.
Let me get, I got the second one. Yes, we have a surplus on services, but we have a 1.2 trillion deficit on goods. And the total is, I can't remember, 800 billion a year or something like that, aggregate deficit. And this, having a surplus on movies doesn't help you make things that you need for the country, for just for living, for protection, for defense, for everything else. So it's good that we have a surplus on services, but it doesn't make up for the deficit on goods. And the first question was, repeat that for
The
me.
first question was more on, is our regulatory environment in the
Okay,
US
yeah,
compared
I
to
got it.
other countries making us more expensive and less competitive?
Well, you can see the answers to the survey questions. The OEMs and the contract manufacturers both believed that we're suffering from regulatory excess. So I have to accept their opinion being smarter than mine. It's always a question, should you let black filthy smoke come out of the smokestack? No. How tight, how limited is good enough, and that's reasonable. People can debate that. My belief is that I think we could probably cut costs by 4% or 5% or something like that if we had regulatory reform. But I do not think we could cut 20% because there isn't enough cost in the regulations, I believe.
So we are actually on at time already. I just have a couple of comments on the wages because that popped up again. Florida manufacturing wages is actually higher than other industries, so keep that in mind. We have a wonderful study. I will add that in the information packet. We did a whole study on the state manufacturing industry, and we're doing okay. So that's to answer that. And then a lot of the other questions are touching on advocacy. We were going to bring our advocacy council on May 30th. We postponed it, but I think I will bring back that in the schedule. Send me your comments, feedback on that one. This is not us. It's another entity that we work with. This is the 501c6 that advocates for manufacturing in the state of Florida. That may be an interesting webinar session based on the questions today. Patricia, next slide, please. Sorry, all, we're a little over time, but I just want to go ahead and, the key takeaways. So today we covered the 4 bullets. Harry did an awesome job. Thank you so much, Harry, for bringing your expertise to us in an hour's time. It's really impossible, but you did a great job. He's made himself available to all of you for follow-up questions, additional learning. Please take that offer. And then we want to remind you that we are a statewide entity. Next slide, please, Patricia. We are statewide. We have our business advisors all across the state. Engage with them and engage with our manufacturers association and our regional hubs. And let me know. So thank you all. Harry, any final comment from you?
First, I'm honored to be here. And for everybody out there, again, tell me about your successes. Let me help you get more successes in the future on Reshoring.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. This is Ruth Buchanan. Thank you for spending your Friday morning with us. See you in July for July 18th Manufacturer of the Year Award. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Have a good day.